Okay, so this lesson is going to be about the bloom. The bloom can be so much fun, and it also can be the bane of your existence, because when you don't want to bloom, they make a mess. Now, blooms come from not knowing your water and paint ratio. So let's say you're doing a wash, okay, and here you are just painting away, doing your wash, and then you're thinking, oh, I need to pull it down more, and you're into the dry, okay, and you allow the water to puddle and you let it dry. So we're going to have to let it dry, and you'll see what'll happen. And you'll see what'll happen up here where I drip the water. Without water control on your brush, it can be very difficult to, oop, I just dripped a little bit right there. Do you see it happening right there? We'll see what'll happen with that. But it's when different amounts of water butt up to each other when you're trying to do a painting. So here I'm going to use a different brush. I'm going to use my little 4 here. And so now this is like I would say coffee, okay? And now what I want to do is fill in the middle between those two pieces, and I'm going to use tea for that pink. And you got to wait for it, because happens, a bloom or a cauliflower happens once it's dry. So I'm going to leave this alone for a little bit, and I got a lot of light on there. How's that? I think you can actually see that better with that light being completely off of there. You can see how this is puddling over here, and how this kind of bloomed up into there, and how a drip of water is doing this up here. So I'm going to let it dry. I can't blow dry this because it'll push. I've got so much water there, it'll push it around. So I'm just going to pause the video while we wait for it to dry. Okay, now that they're dry, can you totally see that? Look at how this bloomed down into here. Obviously, this extreme cauliflower. And then where I dropped that water, look at that. Isn't that incredible? It's like, what the heck? That is just crazy. But what are some things that you can think of that would be a benefit? And do you think you could reincarnate this or reenact this on purpose? That's going to be the big question. And sometimes you don't even want to. I mean, could you see a big fluffy tree, a large tree with just little drops of clean water here and there, creating these textures, or even the dog hair? Or, you know, there's just so many things. What can you think of that would benefit from a bloom? But most importantly, I'm wondering, with these lessons, have you learned how to avoid the bloom? So, I don't know. You let me know. So the next one we're going to do is wet on wet. And I'll show you some techniques that will be just the most amazing to me. The most amazing water transitions. Is very much like the gradient, but the different ways that you can use it. Okay, we did the wet on wet that was with a wash, and I'm going to do something like that here to give you the idea of what we're working with. So I'm going to wet the water, or wet the paper, and my water has gotten very dirty. It's purple. It's kind of crazy. And I use a 2-well system, but since we're using the same colors, I'm not going to worry about it. But here is a perfectly good example as to why you want your water to be clean. I don't know if you can tell that on the camera, but wet on wet I use wet on wet the most for skies and clouds and things of that nature. And I'm going to reach up here into this palette. Now, once again, thinking in terms of your balance of water and paint in your brush and what's on your paper. So I am letting it sit for just a moment because I want it to dry enough that it's not going to scatter. I really don't want it to scatter. I'm thinking of things like, and I'll show you scatter in a minute. I'm thinking of things like a sunset or a sky. So up in the corners, and I'm using the same colors. Up in the corners, you want it to be nice and dark. And it'll make that soft little transition there. Rinsing my brush and making sure it's just a damp brush. I can pick up and push the edges around a little bit because it's malleable. You can do a little bit of lifting, tap your brush, make sure it's completely dry, and you can do some lifting. Can you see the use of that maybe with some clouds? Okay. All right, let's pretend like we've got a sunset now. And what I'm using is the magenta. And we're just going to wash that into here. And again, we're pretending like this is a bit of a sky. And I'm going to leave a couple of spots free. But I'm going to mix it up into the purple. And I just want you to take a look at that and the way that that is blending. This is really nothing, but this is kind of how I do my skies. Skipping areas to make clouds, lifting things out. And you can do all of that while your paint is still wet. Okay. Now, another way to use wet on wet is, like I said, in the making of flowers. Okay, so we've got a pretty pink flower. And I guess I would say that I'm using coffee. Okay, so just a nice little petal. Okay, we'll just do a couple examples of petals right here. Or a heart. Kind of looks like a heart, doesn't it? Now, I want the purple to scatter in here. So again, wet on wet, how much water, it'll look different no matter, depending on how much water you have in your brush. So I'm going to use quite a bit of water on one end and then very little water on the other. So right here is quite a bit of water. And different paints will react differently. See how that's just kind of rushing up? Okay, now I'm going to use it more like a cream consistency. Tapping the extra water off of my brush. And it's a damp brush loaded with pigment. And I'm going to go along the edge here. Now that's just going to slowly bleed out into the edge of that heart or flower, whichever way you want. So depending on how much water you have, can you see how that would make flowers, you know, the inside of the flowers out if you were doing a sunflower or something like that? Or if you just needed to accent ever so gently the edges of the flower without it bleeding off too much. I mean, there's just so many ways of utilizing this particular technique to accentuate the edges of something. But it all has to do with how much water versus paint that is on your brush and on your paper. And with all of these different techniques that I've showed you, you probably will, if I'm doing my job right, you're going to get out a couple of pieces of paper and just play. See what happens when you add just tons of water or little water, straight water, a damp brush, a wet brush. Understanding how the paint, the water, and the paper interact with each other is the key to achieving whatever it is that you're setting out to achieve with your watercolor practice. So, okay, there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and an example. Techniques to help you achieve your desire in the watercolor world. And I really am looking forward to finding out what it is that you learned. What was your favorite? You know, was it the tea, coffee, cream, butter? Was the way that you can achieve bright colors, or the variegated, the clean wash? You know, what is it in this lessons did you learn that hopefully is going to make a difference in your watercolor journey? And let me know if you're wanting me to show you some other techniques that are useful. Ask me any questions that you might have. And, you know, I got to be honest with you, if I don't know the answer, I will find it for you, or I will give you a referral to some other amazing watercolor artist that I have followed forever and ever, and make sure that all of your questions are answered. And I will continue to do these tutorials to help you to learn and to grow on your watercolor journey. I know these were the things I struggled with the most, and hopefully it's of benefit to you. I love you all very much. Mwah! And I'll talk to you real soon.